All right, everyone, things are moving fairly quickly in Venezuela. Now, this doesn't mean that you necessarily have a coup or mass defection or upheaval or anything. It doesn't necessarily mean that. As we've seen, the Maduro regime, through its sheer brutality and through the emaciation and disarming of the people, has been remarkably stable in the face of incredible adversity. Hyperinflation, malnutrition of basically 90% of the population or more, routine at this point, death of infants, like, mothers losing kids is never good for the stability of your country. You've got, political assassinations and intrigue on every level. But now you've got something different, and I'm not sure that this is a particularly common feature of Venezuelan politics. A sergeant there within their guard system has now come out, someone who has some degree of command, at least locally, coming out and declaring that Maduro needs to go, on social media no less. Now, this is uncommon specifically because now this person is a marked man, essentially, that can be killed. What happens, though, is you get local movement going and it can snowball, it can get bigger. What's not clear, now that the opposition and the U.S. and increasingly the Latin American nations are declaring Maduro illegitimate and calling for the military to rise up, it is possible that happens. And even if it's just some low-level individuals like sergeants or captains, on the local level that have 10 men to them or something, that can still definitely be helpful, because what does this sergeant have access to that normal civilians in Venezuela don't have access to? Firearms. They've got whole stockpiles of them probably. They've probably got their own armory locally. What if they get in there and start arming the civilian population? Then you've got a civil war. And then you don't really need eventually the military to defect, because then you've got at least guerrilla warfare destabilizing the state to such a degree that Maduro is incapable of continuing. The U.S., as little as a few days ago, has stated, Trump stating openly, yeah, military option is on the table for Venezuela. It's becoming an extreme situation. I don't really want to go in, and by the way, I would caution, that should be the last thing on our minds with regards to Venezuela. It would be better to send SEAL Team 6 in to blow Maduro's head off than it would be to invade their country, because, the Maduro regime, and also Chavez, have cast the U.S. off as the great Satan for the last couple of decades. If we go in, people think we're about to rob their country blind, and even if it wasn't the U.S. doing it, someone else probably would, so they're not entirely wrong. It'd be much better if Colombia and Brazil and Argentina, some of these Latin American states, could get involved and say, look, it's not even about the socialism at this point, it's about sheer brutality. This doesn't need to be happening in this hemisphere. And that's really what it's about. I've thought for years the U.S. should have an America First foreign policy with regards to the whole hemisphere. That our primary concern should be things from Canada down to Chile and Argentina, along with Las Malvinas, the Falkland Islands. We're not even going to get into that one. As far as territorial claims between the UK and Argentina, jury's still out. I don't really have a strong opinion. I tend to support countries in the American continents more than in others, including Europe. So, I know that's a quirk some people find odd. But that's really what we should be aiming for, is as much stability as possible on the whole land area, because then a lot of our concerns with security, immigration, and stuff begin to dissipate if there's general wealth and prosperity in our neighboring countries. I think it's a good idea, and Maduro is definitely the most destabilizing force. You've got several other destabilized nations in the Americas, like Haiti is totally malfunctioned. It doesn't really have an economy at this point. People are still in rural areas baking mud in order to just have something in their stomachs, although some of that is apparently done just for the tourists. Like they do, they make a big show of it, and then the tourists will open their wallets more. It's fairly lucrative. When the average income in your country is, $600 a year, some tourist gives you $10, it's like, yeah, it's pretty good. So that can happen in Haiti and some of these, I think, Guatemala or Nicaragua, one of these other nations is beginning to show signs of strain and is also heavily socialist. There's a lot of leftism in the Americas, which it should be anywhere but in the Americas. It's a whole point. But Maduro does need to go. It's just a matter of what these people do. My hope is that some of these lower level officials within the military will simply liquidate their armories and start arming the local civilian population. They won't be able to supply groups of people very well, but they will be able to defend themselves. At some point, Maduro might try to purge a bunch of people. They need to be aware that when that happens, the more people are armed, the less purging will go on, the less genocide will be going on, and the more likely foreign groups are to intervene, because there will already be a foothold of opposition to Maduro in the military sense there. Right now, the military is still on his side, at least the higher level officials. Why? Because Maduro kicked out all of the high level officials that weren't part of his regime to begin with. And so all the generals will circle the wagons unless they have a private meeting and they all unanimously decide to just, hit him in the back of the head in a dark alley tomorrow and drag his body into the ocean and then say, well, yeah, Maduro, he's not a problem anymore. Here's your new presidente. Unfortunately, you might end up with a dictatorship if that happens. What if the military decides that a general should be in charge? And they say, well, this is temporary, we're going to reform things, and then we'll go back to being a democratic republic, and then it never happens, and that happens all too commonly in revolutionary situations. So my hope is, I suppose at this point, my hope is that one of these lower-level individuals manages to start something bigger. But to have somebody, at least locally well-known enough, I would assume, to come out and say this, to say, well, Maduro needs to go, the military should defect. He's now a marked man. He's obviously willing to risk his life and limb and freedom and freedom for all of his family and friends in order to try to get Maduro out. That's fairly significant. That's a change in the weather there, so to speak. That's about all. Peace out.